Welcome to Janet's Planet, where we're traveling at the speed of thought. And today I am so super excited. I am here with my good friend, five-time space shuttle astronaut Hoot Gibson, and I like to call him my favorite astronaut. So welcome, Hoot.
Thank you, Janet. Great to be with you as always.
We are here to celebrate Yuri Gagarin's manned spaceflight, the first ever on April 12th, 1961. And how were you influenced by that? How old were you when you saw that?
Oh, now I have to do math. I guess I was 15 years old.
Wow.
I was 15 years old when Yuri flew, and how could anyone not be impressed by the first human being to leave Earth? Now, there were some international overtones because we were in the midst of a Cold War at that point with the Soviet Union.
Sure.
However, even though we're in the midst of a bit of a conflict with the Soviet Union, the achievement, the accomplishment was incredible, just incredible.
And 23 days later, Alan Shepard made his way to suborbital space, but it would take another year before John Glenn would make his complete orbit around the Earth. Because Yuri was in space, was it 108 minutes? Is that true for that first flight?
He made one orbit. He made one orbit of the Earth and then parachuted down at the end of one orbit.
And so from that moment, you're 15, you're watching this. Had you already set your sights on becoming a pilot, though?
Yes. From the time I was about 10 years old, Janet, I knew I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer and a test pilot, just like my father, who was my hero growing up. And I knew that's what I wanted to do from the time I was about 10. Had not set my sights on space yet, because at the time they're flying capsules. I needed the things with wings. I was an airplane person. And so when Space Shuttle came along, I looked at that and I said, oh my gosh, here is the highest, fastest flying airplane in the world. I have got to get me one of those. And so I set my sights then, and I was already on my way to test pilot school.
And again, guys, he flew the space shuttle 5 different times. So tell me about it. It was 1978. You go from test pilot to astronaut in a few hours, right?
January the 16th, 1978. How come I remember that so vividly? Okay, because it was a really big day.
Right.
I got my phone call at about 9 o'clock in the morning to say, well, congratulations, we're selecting you for the very first space shuttle class of astronauts. So by 9 in the morning, I had transformed from test pilot to astronaut. Moved to Houston, spent 18 years in Houston, and as you mentioned, got to fly in space 5 times aboard 4 of the different space shuttles.
Now, tell us a little bit about your experience with docking with the Russians and as we honor Yuri today.
What a fantastic adventure that was. My crew and I had to attempt to learn to speak Russian. Underline the word attempt, because I are an engineer. Engineers ain't taught good in English, let alone in Russian. And in Russian, everything's different. The alphabet's different. There's 33 characters. So in order to go fly and launch with 2 Russians on my crew, Anatoly and Nikolai launched with me aboard Atlantis, I had to be able to speak to them. So here's what I know best in Russian, and I always start off any discussion with a Russian with "Я говорю по-русски очень плохо и понимаю ничего." I speak Russian very badly and understand nothing. But we had to be able to communicate with the Russians. So I got to be the commander and perform the first docking ever done by a space shuttle.
To the Mir station?
To the Mir space station, to the Russian space station Mir. This was in 1995, and so that was 14 years after we had started flying the space shuttle, and yet we had never done a docking until that point. So that was a real piloting challenge, because docking is flown manually by the commander in our space program. And so it was the piloting challenge of a whole lifetime. But what a thrill.
And I guess at that point, it's like you're moving this humongous thing and you're in like zero gravity. And how do you gauge that?
Well,
lots of practice.
Well,
do your
right.
homework, kids.
You're right, lots of practice. We had done probably 98 dockings in the simulator. So we were very well prepared for it. And it's an interesting sounding challenge, because the Mir is racing along, the Mir space station, racing along at 17,500 miles an hour, and we are racing along at 17,500 miles an hour. I am a 1/4 million-pound space shuttle, and the Mir space station is a 1/4 million-pound station. And so the Russians were a little nervous about us banging into their space station with our 1/4 million-pound space shuttle. And that's part of the reason why I had to command the first mission. I had been the chief astronaut. And NASA decided that to reassure the Russians, we were going to send our chief astronaut to command the mission. So that's why I got to do it. And I fought it because I said, any one of my mission commanders could do this. And I didn't want to take that mission for myself. But headquarters was adamant, and I guess that helped pacify the Russians to some degree, and I'm thrilled I got to do it after the fact.
And you won the gold medal award for it. How wonderful.
Yes, they gave me the Yuri Gagarin gold medal for it, so what a thrill.
Now, will you look at the camera and tell everybody out there listening why manned spaceflight is so very important to not only our survival here on Earth, but to our future?
Look at the things we have learned from spaceflight, and it isn't just what we've seen from orbit. Look at technology, the miniaturization of computers, and the miniaturization that gives us wristwatches like this one that have computer technology in them, originated with our space program. Since 1966, not one single tropical storm or hurricane has evaded detection because we see them from orbit. We see them from space. The things we have learned in terms of science, in terms of life sciences, in terms of human beings and our health from the space program have been enormous. Not to mention our understanding of our solar system, the planets, the sun, and the universe. All of those things that we've been somewhat restricted in being able to study them from here on the surface of the Earth. But by being able to go to space, we can get a really clean, really clear look at all these things. So those are just a few of the things. We could probably go on for 10 more minutes about it, but we learn so much from space. And we achieve so much by being able to go to space.
What would you say to any of those boys and girls out there listening right now that are dreaming of maybe not even just going back to the International Space Station, but going all the way to Mars, to being the first pair of boots on the red planet? What do you have to say to them?
What a fantastic adventure that would be. And young people of your age are probably the right age to be the first person to set foot on Mars, because it's going to take us a while to develop the infrastructure. Some of the sorts of things that we saw in the movie The Martian, having a base, an outpost, rovers, and things like that. So the infrastructure that we've got to put together is going to take a little while. But people of your age are about the right age to be the ones to do that. Now, you might say, okay, it's a real long shot to get selected to be an astronaut. The year that I was selected, there were over 10,000 applicants, qualified applicants.
Wow.
And they picked 15 pilots. I was one of the 15 pilots, and they picked 20 mission specialists. And oh, by the way, is it just boys that get to be astronauts?
No.
Of course not. And I say that anytime I talk to a school. First question I ask, is it only boys who get to be astronauts? And of course not. And so boys and girls, men and women, get to be astronauts nowadays. So you could look at those numbers and say, we only picked 15 out of 10,000. Well, gee, the odds are against me. That's one way to look at it. The other way is they're going to pick somebody. It might as well be me. So approach it that way. Now, what does it require? It requires a clean life. It requires that you are not the sort of person who gets in trouble, that you have done well in your studies. So do well in your studies, because when we select astronauts, we look all the way back at their educational record when we're picking astronauts. So elementary school is important. Middle school is important. High school is certainly important. College is important. So do well in your studies.
Ah, thank you so much, Hoot. Is that not inspiring? So, if you are thinking about becoming an astronaut, it's probably time to get busy doing that homework and doing it well. And I like what you said about living a clean life. It sounds like being the best person you can be is also a good thing and a good character trait for an astronaut.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Because you got to get along with people. You got to collaborate up there, right? It's space after all.
You can be cooped up in a big tin can for weeks at a time. So, yes, you've got to be able to get along.
All right. Well, happy Yuri Gagarin Day. Happy Yuri's Night and this wonderful online space party. If you have questions for astronaut Hoot Gibson, just email those to me and we'll make sure those get answered. Let your mind revolve around this thought. The universe is always expanding. Let your mind do the same. And that's the view from Janet's planet.